I was trimming the rose bushes in my backyard when my phone rang. "Dad, don't come over this weekend," my son said. "You don't fit the image we're trying to project." I stared at the roses. "What are you talking about?" "We have important investors coming. Just stay home." The call ended. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Please don't be angry," my daughter-in-law texted. "I need to see you tonight. Don't tell him." An hour later, she sat across from me at my kitchen table, placed a USB drive in front of me, and whispered words that changed everything. This story starts quietly, but won't leave you unchanged. Before I begin, drop a comment for me. Have you ever faced a choice between family loyalty and doing what's right? Your perspective might help someone else. Quick note: some details are fictionalized to strengthen the lesson. What matters most is the message about family trust and justice. The phone call that would unravel everything arrived at 7:32 p.m. on a Friday in early September, interrupting the only peace I'd known in 3 years. I was sitting on my back porch in Buckhead, watching the last light fade over the rose garden I'd tended since my wife died. The phone vibrated against the wooden table, and I saw my son's name on the screen. "Hey, Brent," I said, expecting the usual Friday check-in. Maybe an invitation to Sunday dinner? Maybe a question about Pearl's upcoming birthday? "Dad, don't come over to the house this weekend." His voice had that clipped executive tone he used with subordinates. I sat up straighter. "Why is that, son? Leora feels like your appearance hurts our image." The words landed like a physical blow. I stared at the roses, their late-season blooms turning dark in the twilight, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "I see," I said quietly. "We're entertaining some high-level investors Sunday afternoon. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that I'd paid for his wedding 8 years ago when he and Leora stood under that flower arch at the Botanical Garden. I understood that I'd provided the down payment on their Brookhaven house 6 years ago, $60,000 from the retirement account I'd built over 28 years of government service. I understood that my granddaughter Pearl, 8 years old now, called me every Tuesday night to tell me about school. And I understood that my son, my only child, had just told me I was an embarrassment. "All right," I said. "I'll stay home." "Great. Talk soon." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, watching the darkness settle over the garden. When did my son start measuring my worth by appearances instead of the sacrifices I made to give him that life? The rose bushes needed pruning. I'd been putting it off, but the task felt urgent now. Something to do with my hands. Something to keep me from thinking about the casual cruelty in my son's voice. I stood up and walked to the small tool shed beside the garage. That's when the old instincts flickered. 28 years. That's how long I worked for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division before I retired, at 61. Not the regular IRS, the criminal side. The agents who don't audit returns. We build prosecution cases, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion that funds organized crime. I spent nearly 3 decades sitting across tables from men in expensive suits who thought they were smarter than the system, watching their faces when they realized we'd traced every dollar. 43 cases, 43 convictions, multi-million-dollar schemes, shell companies in the Cayman's real estate empires, built on phantom income. Not one of them saw me coming. I retired early to care for my wife, Margaret, through the 2 years it took cancer to take her. After she died, I stayed retired. Bought this house in Buckhead, kept to myself, tended the roses Margaret had loved. I became the quiet widower on Habersham Road, who waves hello and doesn't ask questions. My son never once asked what I actually did for those 28 years. He knew I worked for the IRS, something with taxes, right, Dad? But he never asked for details. Never wondered about the service commendation medals in the glass case in my study. Never questioned why a simple government retiree reads financial documents with the focus of a man trained to find lies buried in columns of numbers. I never bothered to correct him. Tonight I'm glad I didn't. I stood in my living room looking at those medals and felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years. The cold, patient clarity that used to settle over me when a case stopped being theoretical and became personal. That feeling when you realize the man across the table isn't just breaking laws. He's destroying lives, and he thinks he's going to walk away. Brent Garrett, 40 years old, CEO of Garrett Capital Partners. My son, the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder watching baseball on Sunday afternoons. The teenager who called me from college at midnight when his first serious girlfriend broke his heart. The young man who cried at his mother's funeral and held my hand during the eulogy. That man just told me I hurt his image. For 3 years since Margaret died, I believed retirement meant peace. I was wrong. I walked back to the porch and sat down in the gathering darkness. The rose garden had gone completely black now, just shapes against the fence. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. A car drove past headlights sweeping across the lawn. I thought about calling Brent back. I thought about driving to his house and demanding an explanation. I thought about a lot of things. Then my phone buzzed. A text message, Leora's name on the screen. I opened it. Please don't be angry, Dad. I need to see you. Tonight. I stared at the words, read them again, then a third time. 2 messages, 15 minutes apart. One from my son telling me to stay away because I embarrass him. One from my daughter-in-law, 36 years old, asking to see me tonight, with an urgency that felt like fear. I sat very still the way I used to sit in interrogation rooms, when a suspect said something that didn't match the financial records. The way I used to sit when I knew someone was about to break. Leora had never texted me this late. She'd never used the words, "Don't be angry." And she'd never in 8 years of marriage to my son asked to see me alone at night. I typed back when. The reply came in seconds. Can I come now? Brent is in Savannah until tomorrow. I looked at the time. 7:47 p.m. My son was out of town. My daughter-in-law wanted to see me behind his back, and something in her message, the phrasing, the timing, the desperation told me this wasn't a social call. I typed, "Come over, I'll be here." Then I sat back in my chair and watched the dark garden, feeling the old machinery in my mind start to turn. Something was happening inside my son's house. Something Leora needed to tell me that she couldn't say in front of Brent. And whatever it was bad enough that she was willing to risk his anger to reach out. I had 45 minutes before she arrived. I spent them remembering how to be an investigator again. The doorbell rang at 9:10 p.m. I opened the door to find Leora standing under the porch light, and I knew immediately that something had broken inside my son's house. She was 36 years old, my daughter-in-law for 8 years. Her hair was pulled back hastily. No makeup. Her hands gripped her car keys so tightly the metal bit into her palm. She'd been a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley, before marrying Brent Sharp, confident. The person at my door looked shattered. "Dad," she said, voice cracking. "It wasn't me. I never said that to Brent. He used my name." I stepped aside. "Come in, sweetheart." I watched her with the evaluation I used to give witnesses in interrogation rooms. Eyes focused, not wandering. Voice steady despite emotion. She was telling the truth, and she was terrified. I led her to the kitchen table where Margaret and I used to drink coffee every morning. Leora sat down, placed her keys on the surface, folded her hands. "Do you have 10 minutes?" she asked. "I have much more than that," I said. "Start from the beginning. What came out over the next 2 hours changed everything." Leora spoke methodically like she'd rehearsed this for months. "Financial control first, no bank accounts, in her name. Only cash allowances Brent decided she needed. Then tracking spyware on her iPhone she'd discovered 3 months ago, hidden in a health app she'd never downloaded. I recognized it immediately. I'd seen it in a wire fraud case in 2019. Social isolation. Brent had systematically discouraged her work. Friends criticized her family, made excuses to avoid gatherings. She'd woken up one morning and realized she had no one to call except the man doing this to her. "There's more," she said quietly. "There's a woman, Rebecca. She works at his firm. I have photos. She didn't show me. I didn't need to see them. Then the house, their house, the one I'd helped them buy. Brent was planning to sell it. She'd found documents, refinancing applications, sale price estimates, all moving forward without her signature, without her knowledge. I confronted him 2 weeks ago," she said. "That's when everything got worse. That's when he started talking about you." I took notes on a yellow legal pad, not as a father, as an investigator. Each detail mapped a pattern I'd seen 43 times. Before fraud cases, money laundering, asset concealment. Isolate the victim. Control resources. Eliminate outside perspectives. Execute extraction. How many times had I sat across from men who isolated their victims before draining their accounts, and never once imagined my own son mastering the same playbook. "He's looking at assisted living facilities for you," Leora said, words coming fast now. "I saw the brochures 3 days ago, expensive ones, $8,000 a month, and he's preparing a document for you to sign." My pen stopped. "What kind of document?" "I don't know exactly. But he brought something last week, didn't he? claimed it was medical insurance. I thought back. 7 days ago, Wednesday evening, Brent had stopped by with pearl letter play in the garden. He'd handed me a manila folder, said something about updating beneficiary information, making sure everything was in order. I'd put it in my office drawer, hadn't looked at it. I haven't signed it, I said. Good. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Oh, don't. Why, last Thursday night I heard him on the phone. I was upstairs, he thought I was asleep. His office door was cracked open. He said... She stopped, closed her eyes. He said, once the old man signs, we can move the capital in 48 hours. Clean transfer. Nobody questions a son managing his elderly father's assets. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked past 11. I looked at Leora, really looked at her. 8 years married to my son. No job because he'd convinced her to quit Morgan Stanley, to focus on family. No bank account, no friends, no escape. And now she was sitting in my kitchen at 11:15 on a Friday night, warning me that her husband was hunting both of us. Who was he talking to? I asked. I don't know. But Dad... She leaned forward, eyes bloodshot. I don't know what he's planning, but whatever's in that document, it's not insurance paperwork. And whatever he needs 48 hours to move, it's not small. I thought about the last 3 months. Brent's distance, canceled dinners, awkward conversations, subtle questions about my retirement accounts, my investments, my health. 28 years of seeing this exact pattern from the other side of the table. Leora, I said carefully, how much do you know about what I did before I retired? She blinked. You worked for the IRS. Something with taxes? Criminal investigation, I said. Financial fraud prosecution. I spent 3 decades building cases against people who thought they could steal money and hide behind legal structures. Her eyes widened. I've seen this before, I continued. Many times. And you're right. Whatever he needs me to sign, it's not about insurance. She stood slowly picking up her keys. I need to get home before he calls to check. He thinks I'm at the grocery store. I walked her to the door. She hugged me quick, desperate, then pulled back. Don't sign it, Dad, she said. No matter what happens, don't sign it. I watched her taillights disappear down Habersham Road. Then I closed the door, locked it, and walked to my home office. The manila folder sat in the 3rd drawer on the left, exactly where I'd put it 7 days ago. I pulled it out, sat down at my desk, turned on the lamp. Time to read my son's document through the eyes of an IRS criminal investigation agent, not a father. I opened the folder. The first words on the page were, Durable Power of Attorney. My blood ran cold. At 11:45 p.m., under the cold light of my desk lamp, I read the document my son had called insurance paperwork and understood, with perfect clarity, that I was looking at a blueprint for my own financial execution. Durable Power of Attorney. The words sat at the top in formal legal typeface drafted by a corporate attorney whose name I didn't recognize. I read it the way I used to read financial records in interrogation rooms, line by line looking for truth buried in legal language. Comprehensive authority over all financial accounts, investments, and real estate transactions. Full medical decision-making power. Immediate effect upon signature. No expiration date. No requirement for physician certification of incapacity. If I signed this, Brent would control everything. My pension, my savings, the proceeds from selling our D.C. house after Margaret died. $2.3 million, everything I'd built. Over 3 decades, everything we'd saved to leave our family. It only needed my signature and a notary stamp. I placed the paper on the desk and walked to the back porch. The rose garden was invisible in the September night, just shapes against the fence. I stood there thinking about Margaret, really thinking about her for the first time all week. She'd helped me plant these roses 3 years ago, a month before the diagnosis. She'd chosen the varieties, decided where each should go. This is where we'll have coffee when you retire, she'd said. You can finally relax. She never got to see me relax, and now her son was trying to steal the only thing she'd left me, the freedom to age with dignity. Every decision I'd make for the rest of my life would belong to him. Where I lived, what I spent, whether I needed care in a facility costing $8,000 a month while he drained my accounts to cover whatever hole he'd dug. I went back inside and dialed a number I hadn't called in 18 months. Vernon Dalton answered on the first ring. Walter, it's after midnight. What's wrong? Vernon was 64, a former IRS Criminal Investigation Supervisory Special Agent who'd retired 2 years after me. Unlike me, he hadn't stayed retired. He consulted for DOJ, now working active investment fraud cases. We'd worked together for 15 years, built 23 prosecutions side by side. After 25 years of knowing each other, he knew I never called without serious cause. "I need to tell you about a company," I said. "Garrett Capital Partners." Silence. "Then your son's firm?" "Yes." "What's happened?" I told him. Not as a father, as an investigator briefing a supervisor, the dismissive call, Leora's visit, the systematic abuse, the power of attorney, the overheard conversation about moving capital in 48 hours. Facts only. Zero emotion. When I finished, Vernon was quiet. "Do you have an open case?" I asked. "What do you need me to pull?" "Walter," he said slowly, "your son's company, I saw that name in a preliminary SEC review file about 3 months ago. It's still in review phase. Not a formal investigation yet, but it's on their radar." The room felt colder. "How preliminary?" "Routine compliance check based on investor complaint patterns. They haven't opened a Wells notice or formal enforcement. But if what you're telling me is accurate, if he's trying to access your assets within 48 hours of getting the POA, he's not preparing for an audit. He's preparing for collapse. Once the old man signs, we can move the capital in 48 hours. Leora's words echoed. "Can you access the SEC file?" I asked. "No. Different agency, different jurisdiction. But I have an active DOJ case investment advisor, fraud Atlanta-based defendants. I can legally query public records, cross-match analytical data within those boundaries. You provide analytical guidance. That's all legal." I understood. Vernon would search strictly within his case parameters. The father would analyze. We wouldn't cross any lines. "Everything that's a matter of public record regarding Garrett Capital Partners," I said. "I'll have preliminary findings by morning," Vernon said. "Form ADV filings. Georgia Secretary of State records any civil litigation on Pacer. But Walter," he paused. "What if the SEC escalates from review to formal investigation? Everything freezes. Assets, documents, testimony. You lose control of the narrative. And if you're right about what he's planning, if he's about to move money illegally using your power of attorney, we're talking elder financial abuse on top of whatever securities violations already exist. The SEC already knows." "How long do I have?" I asked. "Impossible to say. SEC preliminary reviews can take 6 months or 6 days. If another investor complains, if someone inside talks, if Brent makes a stupid move, any of those could trigger escalation tomorrow." I looked at the power of attorney on my desk. My son had drafted this, brought it to my house, lied about what it was, and waited for me to sign away everything Margaret and I had built. "I need to protect Leora," I said, "and I need to understand how many others he's hurt." "I'll start pulling records tonight," Vernon said. "But Walter, listen to me. Time is the one thing you don't have." The call ended. I sat staring at the dark window, listening to the house settle. Vernon was right. The SEC was already circling. Federal investigators were already looking at Garrett Capital Partners. If they escalated before I could protect Leora and secure evidence, the machinery of federal law would freeze everything, including any chance to save my granddaughter from the fallout. I had hours, maybe days, not weeks. I picked up the power of attorney and locked it in my desk drawer. My son wasn't getting my signature. Not tonight, not ever. But refusing wouldn't be enough. If Brent was desperate enough to forge his wife's words and hunt his own father's assets, he'd find another way. I needed to know what he'd done, who else he'd hurt, how deep it ran, and I needed to know it by morning. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Vernon with every detail from Leora's visit. Names, dates, amounts, patterns. Everything that might matter when the federal investigation came. Because it was coming. The only question was whether I'd be ready. The email arrived at 8:17 a.m. on Saturday morning, while I was pouring my second cup of coffee. A confirmation from Sunrise Gardens Senior Living for a facility tour next Wednesday scheduled by the family. Sent to an address I hadn't used in 2 years. I set down the coffee pot and stared at the screen. The email had been sent to my old official IRS criminal investigation contact address, the one I'd used for 28 years, the one that still forwarded to my personal inbox, because I'd never bothered to shut it down. I checked it every morning out of professional habit, The same way I used to check it before walking into the office in D.C. Brent must have copied it from an outdated contact list. He didn't know I still monitored this account. He thought he was covering his tracks. Dear Mr. Garrett, the email read, "This confirms your scheduled tour of Sunrise Gardens Senior Living on Wednesday, September 13th at 2 p.m. The family has requested information regarding our memory care wing and private suite options. We look forward to welcoming you." I read it 3 times. The sequence crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. Tour the facility Wednesday. Show me the rooms, the care options, the costs. Then probably Friday or over the weekend. Bring the power of attorney back, apply more pressure, get the signature. Commit me the following week before I had time to think or consult anyone. He'd planned the entire timeline before he ever handed me that document. This wasn't desperation. This was methodology. How long does it take to plan something like this to schedule the facility? Draft the POA, rehearse the lies to Leora, practice the dismissive phone call, and still call your father on a Friday night like nothing was wrong. I forwarded the email to Vernon with one line. He set this up before he even had my signature. Then I sat at my kitchen table and waited. Vernon called at 2 o'clock that afternoon via Zoom. I opened my laptop in the home office and saw his face on screen, older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, but the same sharp eyes that used to catch lies across interrogation tables. "I've got the public records search results," he said without preamble. "You're going to want to sit down." "I'm already sitting." "Then hold on to something." He shared his screen. I saw a spreadsheet, transaction logs, account numbers, dates, amounts. My eyes tracked the columns automatically, decades of training kicking in before Vernon said a word. Garrett Capital Partners has shown highly irregular transaction patterns between client accounts over the past 18 months, Vernon said. His voice had shifted into the flat, clinical tone we used to use when briefing prosecutors. Incoming funds from new investors are being used to pay returns to existing investors. Account balances don't match reported holdings. Classic shuffling pattern. I felt my chest tighten. Net loss, $3.2 million. The number hung in the air between us. "This is a Ponzi scheme, Walter. Your son is running a Ponzi scheme." I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. Outside, the September sun was bright on the lawn. A neighbor was mowing grass. Life continuing normally while my world collapsed. "How many investors?" I asked. "At least 23 households that I can identify from public filings. Most of them senior citizens. Retirement accounts, pension rollovers. The kind of money people can't afford to lose. 23 families, most of them senior citizens, people just like me." "Show me the transaction flow," I said. Vernon pulled up a diagram on screen. I watched the money move, new investments coming in through the front door, immediately flowing out the back to cover withdrawal requests from earlier investors. The classic pattern. I'd seen it 43 times in my career. I'd helped to prosecute men who did exactly this. I'd never imagined I'd see my son's name on top of the chart. "When did it start?" I asked. Based on the pattern, probably 18 months ago. Maybe 2 years. Something went wrong with his legitimate investment strategy. Market losses, bad bets, doesn't matter what. Instead of taking the hit and closing the fund, he started using new money to cover old obligations. Once you start that cycle, you can't stop. You need bigger and bigger infusions just to stay afloat. Until you collapse. "Until you collapse," Vernon confirmed. "And Walter, the SEC preliminary review I mentioned, they're seeing the same patterns. They just haven't moved to formal enforcement yet." "How long does he have?" Vernon leaned back in his chair. "Months, maybe weeks. Once the SEC escalates from preliminary review to formal investigation, they'll freeze everything. Assets, accounts, operations. Then comes the Wells notice, the enforcement action, and eventually criminal referral to DOJ. We're talking wire fraud, securities, fraud, mail fraud, federal charges, multi-year prison sentences. I thought about the power of attorney sitting locked in my desk drawer. The facility tour scheduled for Wednesday. The 48 hours Leora had overheard Brent planning. "My money," I said slowly. $2.3 million. That's almost enough to plug the hole," Vernon finished. "Not completely, but enough to buy time. Enough to pay off the loudest investors, cover the most immediate withdrawal requests. Keep the SEC from finding the smoking gun for another few months. Your son isn't trying to steal your retirement out of greed, Walter. He's trying to steal it to stay out of federal prison. The room felt very cold. He was going to commit me to that facility, I said. Take control of my assets through the POA. Move the money within 48 hours. Use it to cover his tracks. Yes, and Leora Pearl. What happens to them when this collapses? They lose everything. The house, the accounts, any assets in Brent's name. When federal prosecutors go after Ponzi schemes, they claw back every dollar they can find. Innocent spouses, children, doesn't matter. The court takes it all to pay back the victims. I sat back down at my desk. Walter Vernon said quietly, Your son doesn't just want your money. He needs your money to keep out of federal prison. I closed the laptop. The house was silent around me. Outside, the neighbor's lawnmower droned on, life continuing normally. My son, my only child, had built a $3.2 million fraud, targeting senior citizens. And when it started collapsing, he turned to the last target left, his own father. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing while the afternoon light shifted across the floor. I was watering the roses at 4:30 Saturday afternoon when my neighbor Melvin Archer walked across the yard carrying 2 cups of coffee, the kind of quiet gesture that meant something needed to be said, without asking permission first. Melvin was 67, a retired FBI supervisory agent who'd lived next door for 5 years. We'd built the kind of friendship that forms between federal agents, not many words, but absolute trust when it mattered. He handed me a cup and nodded at the roses. You've got that look, Walter. The one you used to get when a case turned complicated. I set down the watering can. I need a clean public background check on a specific name. Brent's business partner. Melvin didn't ask why. That was the code when one asked for help, you didn't ask questions first. Give me the name, he said. Pacer State Records, SEC Enforcement Registries, all open source. I can have it by tomorrow. I gave him the name, then added, My chess partner Seymour Lockwood texted last week asking pointed questions about Garrett Capital Partners. I didn't think much of it then. The words hung between us. Seymour was 72, a retired accountant. Kind man, careful with money, exactly the kind of target my son would choose. You think he's one of the victims? Melvin asked. I think it's possible. Melvin nodded. I'll have those records by morning. After he left, I texted Seymour. About your question regarding Garrett Capital. Can you call me? His response came immediately. Tomorrow afternoon, important conversation. 2 federal agents retired sharing coffee on a quiet porch. The kind of alliance that forms without paperwork. Just the silent understanding that when someone asks for help, you don't ask why first. Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, I met Leora at a small coffee shop near her church, 3 kilometers from Sandy Springs. Brent was returning from Savannah at 11. We had exactly 1 hour. She walked in wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, sat down, and placed a small USB drive on the table. You don't know this, Dad, she said quietly, but I've been preparing for a long time. 8 months. I looked at the drive. Black plastic no larger than my thumbnail. What's on it? 847 files. Every transaction, every transfer, every hidden account. I used an independent tablet. Bought it with cash I scraped together over 2 years. Brent monitors my iPhone but doesn't know this device exists. Every night while he slept, I photographed bank statements, investment records, correspondence. Backed everything up to a separate iCloud account. I picked up the drive, held it carefully, then looked at her not as a father-in-law but as a veteran agent evaluating an operative. You did this alone for 8 months, while he tracked your phone, controlled your money, and isolated you. She nodded. You did a better job than most agents I ever taught. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, she said. I just knew that if I ever got the chance to leave, I needed proof. It's real, I said, and it's worse than you know. I told her about Vernon's findings, the Ponzi scheme, 23 families, the SEC review. Her face went pale. Oh, God, Pearl, when this collapses, we're not going to let it collapse on Pearl, I said firmly. That's why you gathered this evidence. We're going to protect her. She nodded, wiping her eyes. 847 pieces of evidence, each one a brick, Leora had quietly removed from the prison Brent built around her, and now she was handing me the blueprint to tear down the entire structure. Then her expression changed. Something darker moved across her face. There's one more thing, she said. I waited. He's trying to borrow more money. My chest tightened. From who? Not from someone. Against something. She pulled out her phone, the hidden tablet, and showed me a photograph of a letter. Bank letterhead, loan application. I found this correspondence. It looks like it involves our house. I stared at the screen. A second mortgage. Not a refinance, an additional loan against the home equity. The house Leora and Pearl lived in. The house I'd helped them buy. How much I asked? She scrolled down. $380,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Brent wasn't just hunting my retirement. He wasn't just defrauding 23 families. He was preparing to mortgage his own daughter's home, the place where Pearl slept, believing her world was safe. The application is pending, Leora said. But Dad, if he forges my signature the way he forged my words about you, he can't get a mortgage without your consent, I said. Georgia law requires spousal authorization, unless he has power of attorney over my finances, she said quietly, which he's been talking about, saying I'm too emotional to handle money decisions. I looked at the USB drive on the table. 847 files. 8 months of secret work. And now this evidence that Brent was preparing to steal from his own child. We have about 10 minutes before I need to leave, Leora said. He'll call if I'm late. I pocketed the drive and stood up. Go home. Act normal. And Leora, she looked up at me. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand? Whatever happens from here, you're not alone. She nodded and walked out. I sat there for another minute, feeling the weight of the drive in my pocket. $380,000 against Pearl's home. 23 defrauded families. My own retirement targeted. And somewhere in all of this, possibly Seymour. A man who trusted me, who might have invested in my son's company, because he thought the Garrett name meant something. Brent wasn't just destroying his own life. He was destroying everyone around him. And he had no idea that his targets were building a case against him piece by piece, with the same methodical precision he'd once used to build his fraud. The phone rang at 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon, Melvin Archer calling with the background check results, and I knew from the silence before he spoke that whatever came next would be worse than I'd imagined. Your son's partner, Lyle Caldwell, age 45. He has a 2019 criminal conviction for securities fraud in Tampa, Florida. Sentenced to 18 months, supervised probation, released in 2021. Legally changed his name that same year and relocated to Atlanta in 2022. I felt my hand tighten on the phone. He co-founded Garrett Capital Partners with your son in early 2023. Chief Operations Officer. Does Brent know about the conviction? I doubt it. The name change was executed through a sealed court order. Unless your son ran a federal background check, he'd have no way to know. I thought about Brent. 40 years old. Smart in some ways, dangerously naive in others. Walter, Melvin said quietly, your son isn't the mastermind here. He's the shield. A career fraudster needed someone with a clean name, a respectable family background to hide behind. Brent was perfect. My son isn't evil. He's spectacularly, dangerously incompetent, and a predator saw that weakness from a mile away. Thank you, Melvin. Just be careful. I sat there staring at nothing. Brent wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a mark. A useful idiot with the right last name and enough ambition to be manipulated into building a Ponzi scheme without realizing what he was building. At 5 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Seymour Lockwood stood on my porch holding his car keys. He was 72, a retired manufacturing executive who'd played chess with me every Wednesday for 5 years. Kind eyes, steady hands, the sort of man who'd built a careful life and planned a careful retirement. He looked older than I remembered. Seymour, come in. We sat in the living room, him on the couch, me in the chair. The same seats we'd used hundreds of times for chess games. But there was no board between us today. I got your text, he said, about Garrett Capital. I nodded. You asked me about it last week. I should have paid attention. He looked down at his hands. Walter, I need to tell you something. And I need you to know I don't blame you for any of it. My chest tightened. 6 months ago, your son approached me about an investment opportunity. Garrett Capital Partners. Presentations, projections, everything looked professional. But the real reason I invested... He stopped, took a breath. He told me, my dad backs me 100%. You know Walter Garrett wouldn't let me build something dishonest. And I believed him. Because I've known you for 5 years. I know what you did for a living. So when your son said you backed him, I didn't even verify it. I just wrote the check. How much? I asked quietly. $400,000, my retirement savings. The room felt very cold. Seymour, I had no idea the firm even existed. I never backed him. I never endorsed anything. I know that now, he said. I figured it out about 3 months ago when the reported returns stopped aligning with reality. I ran my own numbers. The math didn't work. I consulted a private attorney 2 months ago. She suspected fraud, but didn't have documentation to prove it. Why didn't you tell me? He smiled sadly. Because you're my friend Walter. I didn't want to bring drama to your family. I thought maybe I was wrong. And if I was right, I didn't want to be the one to tell you your son was a thief. How many layers of betrayal can one man stack before the weight becomes unbearable, son against father? Reputation against friend, trust against $400,000. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the evening sun was setting, normal life continuing while everything collapsed. The question is, Seymour said behind me, what do we do about it? I turned to face him. I'm building a case. With help, former colleagues. We have evidence, but I need time. How much time? Weeks, maybe a month. He nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Patience and silence. If Brent finds out, you know. If he finds out, I know he'll run or destroy evidence. I need him to believe everything is still under control. Seymour stood up, picked up his keys. How long can you wait before you need this resolved? I asked. How long do you need? I can't give you a specific timeline yet. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, genuinely. Smiled and said, Walter, I've waited 5 years for you to ask me for a favor. I can wait a few weeks. He walked to the door, paused. For what it's worth, I never doubted you. Not for a second. Your son used your name, but he didn't understand what that name meant. You're going to fix this. I know you will. Then he left. I stood at the window watching his car pull away. My closest friend. 5 years of Wednesday chess games. $400,000 stolen using my reputation as the bait. 23 investor families, most of them seniors, and now I knew at least one name, one face, $1 amount. Seymour Lockwood, $400,000, gone. Because my son told him I backed the company 100%, I walked back to my office and sat down at the desk. Leora's USB drive sat there next to my phone. 847 files of evidence, Melvin's background check on Lyle Caldwell, Vernon's analysis of the Ponzi scheme, Seymour's testimony. The case was building, piece by piece, but so was the weight of knowing exactly who Brent had hurt and how he'd used me to do it. Vernon Dalton's face appeared on my Zoom screen at 9 a.m., Monday morning, with the expression I'd seen 100 times in our years working cases together. The look that meant the situation was worse than anyone thought, and the clock had just started ticking, much faster. We have a problem, he said, a big one. I was at my desk, coffee untouched, Leora's USB drive next to my laptop. Go ahead. The CFO of Garrett Capital, Kieran Long. He filed an SEC whistleblower form, TCR, 4 months ago, around May. I felt the room shift. 4 months. Yes. And the SEC has officially escalated from informal inquiry to formal order of investigation. They now have statutory authority to issue subpoenas and compel production of records. When did the escalation happen? 6 to 8 weeks ago. They're already issuing document requests. That's why Brent is feeling pressure unexplained queries on public filings, mounting anxiety. He doesn't know the exact origin. 4 months. The CFO filed 4 months ago, while I was tending roses and playing chess with Seymour. The federal government had already opened an investigation. What does that mean for our timeline? I asked. A Wells notice typically follows within 3 to 6 months of a formal order. Once they issue that notice, it's procedural notification that the SEC intends to bring civil enforcement action. After that, things move fast. How fast? Days, maybe weeks. They'll freeze assets to prevent dissipation before judgment. And Walter, he paused. If that asset freeze happens before Leora's divorce is filed and her claims are registered with the court, she loses everything. I stood and walked to the window. Outside morning sun on Habersham Road. A mail truck drove past. Normal Monday while my world compressed into weeks. Explain that, I said. Vernon pulled up a document. A Wells notice is standard notification preceding civil enforcement. Once issued, the SEC often moves immediately to freeze the defendant's assets. They file for a temporary restraining order, argued dissipation risk, and a judge usually grants it within hours. And if Leora hasn't filed for divorce yet, then her marital property claims don't exist in the court system. The federal asset freeze takes priority. Everything gets locked. Accounts, real estate, investments. The divorce court can't touch it because the federal action came first. Leora would have to wait until the SEC case resolves, which could take years. By then, assets are depleted by legal fees or distributed to fraud victims through receivership. I turned from the window. So we're racing against the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Yes. How much time do we have? I can't give you an exact date. The Wells notice could drop in 3 months or 3 weeks. The SEC doesn't publish timelines. But Walter, you need to move now. Get Leora to a family law attorney today. File the divorce petition file for emergency asset protection. Get everything on record before the feds freeze it all. I thought about Leora. 847 files. 8 months of courage. What about the evidence she collected? It's gold for the divorce case. Financial records, hidden accounts, systematic abuse. But it won't matter if the SEC freezes everything first. The federal government doesn't care about marital property disputes. When they're prosecuting securities fraud, they'll take it all sorted out later. 28 years hunting fraudsters for the federal government, and now I was trying to outmaneuver the same machinery I once commanded before it accidentally crushed my own family in the process. There's one more thing, Vernon said. The CFO, Kieran Long. He's cooperating fully with the SEC. That means insider testimony, internal documents, everything they need to prove the Ponzi scheme. This isn't a weak case. This is airtight. When that Wells notice drops, it's over. Does Brent know about the CFO? No indication. Long filed confidentially. The SEC protects those identities until they're ready to move publicly. But once the Wells notice is issued, everything becomes public record. I sat back down. What happens to Brent when the notice is issued? SEC civil enforcement first finds disgorgement, lifetime ban from securities industry. Then DOJ reviews for criminal prosecution. Wire fraud, securities fraud. We're talking federal prison, Walter. Multiple years. I thought about my son, 40 years old, father of an 8-year-old girl, standing on the edge of federal prison because a career fraudster had manipulated him. And I thought about Leora and Pearl, about to lose everything because the federal government's timeline didn't account for a little girl who might lose her home. What happens if the SEC issues the Wells notice before we move? I asked. Asset freeze. The court locks everything to prevent dissipation. If Leora hasn't filed her divorce claims first, she gets nothing. No house, no settlement, no protection. Pearl loses her home, and Leora walks away with whatever's left after the SEC and bankruptcy receivers take their cut. Vernon leaned forward on screen, his face serious. Walter, listen to me. I know you respect the SEC's process. I know you spent your career working with them. But this time you're not on their side of the table. You're on the other side. And if the SEC issues that Wells notice, first the asset freeze destroys Leora. You have to beat the feds to the punch. The screen went dark as Vernon ended the call. I sat there in the silent office. 3 to 6 months, maybe less. The Wells notice could drop any day. And when it did, everything would freeze Brent's assets, Leora's claims, Pearl's home. Unless I moved first. Unless I could coordinate a family law filing an SEC investigation and a personal mission to protect my granddaughter, all before the federal government's schedule crushed everyone in its path. I picked up my phone and started typing a message to Leora. Time to find a divorce attorney, today. Pastor Clarence Whitfield looked me in the eye across his small church office desk at 2:30 Monday afternoon and said the words that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my son's timeline. Walter, I've been trying to tell you for months. I sat down in the chair across from him. Clarence was 71, the Baptist pastor who had served Buckhead Community Baptist Church for 35 years, the man who buried my wife 3 years ago, the man who held my hand at her graveside. What do you mean? I asked. I've asked you multiple times if you looked like you were carrying a heavy burden, if you needed to talk. Do you remember? I did remember, 3 or 4 times over the past few months. I'd assumed he meant my grief over Margaret. I thought you meant my grief, I said. I was wrong. He nodded slowly. 3 months ago, June, your son came to see me. He asked how to convince an aging parent to sign a power of attorney for his own protection. He wanted my help approaching you. He said you were stubborn, that you needed guidance from someone you trusted. I felt my chest tighten. What did you tell him? I refused, flatly. I told him that if you needed a POA, you were more than capable of making that decision yourself. that I wouldn't be part of manipulating you into signing legal documents. He left angry. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. Why didn't you tell me then? I asked. Clarence looked down at his hands. Because I wasn't sure if it was my place to interfere in a family's private financial decisions. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was a legitimate reason. But Walter, he looked up. I've been watching you for months, waiting for you to come to me. And when you didn't, I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like I was accusing your son of something terrible. He went to the man who buried my wife, the man who held my hand at her graveside, and asked him how to rob me. I need you to be a witness, I said quietly. Can you do that? Yes, whatever you need. I stood up. Thank you, Clarence, for refusing him, and for telling me now. He walked me to the door. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. You're telling me now. That's what matters. Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Leora. Dad, I'm in a grocery store parking lot. Brent's at the office. I only have a few minutes. What's wrong? I accessed his email account. I kept his password from before he started the surveillance. He never updated it. I found bank correspondence. A second mortgage. My hand tightened on the phone. How much? $380,000, executed 4 months ago. May, secured against our house in Sandy Springs. Did you sign it? No, I never saw it. He executed it alone, forged my signature, or omitted marital authorization entirely. The correspondence shows it's already in default warning status. When does it default? 73 days from now. If it defaults, the bank forecloses. Pearl loses her home. I closed my eyes. Brent had mortgaged his daughter's security, the house where an 8-year-old girl slept, believing her world was safe. And he'd done it 4 months ago, the same month the CFO filed the SEC whistleblower complaint. The same month, everything started collapsing. Is the loan fraudulent? Leora asked. Yes. Georgia code requires spousal authorization for loans secured by marital property. If he forged your signature or omitted it, the loan is voidable. But we need to move fast. How fast? I'll call you back in an hour. 73 days until Pearl loses her home. I hung up and immediately dialed Vernon. He answered on the first ring. What's wrong? Brent executed a fraudulent second mortgage against the family home. $380,000. 4 months ago. It defaults in 73 days. If it defaults, Pearl is evicted. Vernon was quiet for a moment. Jesus, Walter. Can we void it? If it's truly fraudulent, if he forged Leora's signature or executed it without proper authorization, yes. Georgia marital property law is clear. But you need a lawyer. Today. And you need to file immediately to prevent foreclosure. I looked out the window at the roses Margaret had planted. The September sun was bright. Normal day in Buckhead while my granddaughter's home hung in the balance. Vernon, I said slowly, let me lay this out. $3.2 million Ponzi scheme targeting 23 senior families. $380,000 fraudulent mortgage threatening an 8-year-old's home. SEC Wells. Notice dropping any day. Leora needs to file for divorce before the asset freeze. And I need to protect everyone, Leora Pearl Seymour, all the other investors. Yes, I need 6 weeks to build the case and protect everyone. Can we get it? Long silence on the line. I waited. Finally, Vernon spoke. His voice was grave. We have to. But Walter, you don't have a day to waste. I hung up and sat at my desk. 6 weeks, 42 days. Dismantle a Ponzi scheme. Void a fraudulent mortgage. Protect 23 families. Save Leora from financial ruin. Keep Pearl in her home. Beat the SEC to the Wells notice. And do it all before my son realized what was happening and either ran or destroyed evidence. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. First family law attorney for Leora. Emergency filing to void the mortgage and establish divorce proceedings. Second forensic analysis of Leora's 847 files. Find every transaction, every hidden account, every piece of evidence. Third coordinate with Vernon on SEC timeline. Figure out exactly how much time remained before the Wells notice. Fourth document, everything. Build a case that would stand up in family court, bankruptcy court, and federal enforcement proceedings simultaneously. I looked at the list. 6 weeks. 42 days. Starting now. At 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon, I cleared my desk, laid out Leora's evidence files in chronological order, pulled 3 highlighters from the drawer, and began the kind of deep forensic analysis I hadn't performed in 4 years. This time hunting my own son the way I once hunted strangers. Yellow highlighter for incoming funds. blue for outgoing transfers, red for shell company transactions. I started with file 1 and moved forward methodically. Behind me, I'd set up a whiteboard with a timeline January 2022 through present. Every transaction got a marker on the board. Every pattern got noted. Cold coffee sat on the desk forgotten. 3 hours in, I saw it. The structure was sophisticated but dated. Brent had designed his hidden shell accounts to specifically evade the exact transactional patterns. My generation of IRSCI agents used to catch fraud in the 1990s and early 2000s, avoiding paper trails, layering transfers through multiple entities, timing deposits to fall just below reporting thresholds. But those thresholds hadn't existed since 2010. The methods I'd used to track money laundering had been replaced by digital forensics that caught patterns I could only dream about 20 years ago. Brent learned these evasion techniques somewhere. Then I remembered. Sunday dinners. 3 years ago, before Margaret died, Brent would ask me to tell stories about the old cases. How did you catch them, Dad? What mistakes did they make? I'd shared those stories out of parental pride. A father talking about his career to a son who seemed genuinely interested. Every Sunday dinner, when he asked about the old cases, I thought I was teaching him to respect the law. I was teaching him how to break it. He studied me. He actually studied my methods to evade them. I taught him every pattern I used to catch men like him, but only what I knew before I retired in 2019. Only the old playbook, not the new one. I sat back in my chair and looked at the whiteboard. My son thought he was invisible because he'd learned from a master, but he'd only learned from a retired master. He knew how to hide from 1995, not 2023. I kept working. Around 7:30 p.m. I found it. File number 412, buried in Lyra's 8th month of documentation. A series of automated recurring transfers between 3 shell LLCs. Small amounts, 15,000 here, 20,000 there, spread across different dates. The kind of transfers that would have required manual matching across separate bank statements back when I was active. We would have needed weeks to connect them, assuming we even noticed the pattern. But modern forensic software, it catches this instantly. The algorithms look for exactly this kind of recurring pattern between related entities, regardless of how the transfers are timed or structured. Brent had designed his scheme to be invisible to investigators using my methods. He didn't realize those methods were obsolete. The amounts were small enough to avoid the old thresholds, but large enough to form a damning pattern under current detection algorithms. Every transfer left a perfect digital trail that spelled out one word in capital letters, Ponzi. How does a father feel when he discovers his son studied him, not to become like him, but to become invisible to him? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Brent thought he was smarter than his father. He was wrong, not because I'm smarter, but because he only knew 70% of what I once knew. And I'd spent 4 years watching the profession evolve past me, understanding that the world had moved on to tools and techniques I'd never learned to use. My son had frozen in time thinking 2003 era IRS methods were still the standard. They weren't. I scrolled down in file 412, and there they were, the names, all 23 investor families who had trusted Brent Garrett with their retirement savings, complete with investment amounts and dates. Seymour Lockwood, $400,000. Investment date, March 2023. Robert and Patricia Hoffman, $290,000. Investment date, January 2023. Eleanor Vance, $175,000. Investment date, April 2023. The list continued. 23 names, 23 amounts, most of them seniors, most of them investing their entire retirement savings based on one simple premise. Walter Garrett's son would never run a dishonest firm. I printed the list and laid it on my desk. 23 families, faces I might know. People who played chess at the community center, attended church on Sundays, gardened in Buckhead yards. People who trusted the Garrett name because they knew what it meant. People my son had destroyed. I looked at file 412 on my monitor. His entire vulnerability exposed in a single digital trail he thought was invisible. Automated recurring transfers that showed the classic Ponzi scheme pattern. Small enough that my generation would have missed them. Large enough that current algorithms would flag them immediately. And inside this file, the evidence I needed. Not just to prove the fraud, but to name every single victim. to quantify every single loss, to build a case that would stand up in family court, bankruptcy court, and federal enforcement proceedings. I saved the file, backed it up 3 different ways, and sent a copy to Vernon with a single line. Found it. File 412. Complete victim list included. Then I sat back and looked at the whiteboard covered in my handwriting. Timeline, transaction flows, shell company structures, the entire architecture of my son's fraud laid out in blue marker. At 8 p.m., the last daylight faded through my office window. Brent had learned 70% of what I knew, just enough to believe he was untouchable, but not enough to actually be safe. The blind spot was clear. The evidence was devastating. And inside file 412 were 23 names, 23 amounts, 23 households where grandparents were quietly wondering why their retirement accounts weren't growing the way Brent Garrett had promised they would. I picked up my phone and texted Leora, "Found it! Attorney tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll pick you up." Her response came immediately. "Thank you, Dad." I turned off my office light and walked to the kitchen. 6 weeks to dismantle this. 42 days. But now I had the map. File 412 was the key to everything: the fraudulent mortgage, the Ponzi scheme, the victim list, the smoking gun. My son thought he'd learned how to be invisible. He was wrong. And tomorrow we'd start tearing down everything he'd built. Attorney Adrienne Blackwell removed her reading glasses at 9 a.m. Wednesday morning, looked across her 15th floor Midtown Atlanta conference table at the evidence Leora and I had brought, and delivered the verdict we'd been waiting for. "You have a case, and it's stronger than most I see." Adrienne was 58, a family law partner with 3 decades of divorce and asset fraud cases to her name. She'd spent the last 2 hours reviewing everything Leora's complete digital archive. My forensic analysis with file 412 highlighted the assisted living facility, email, the unsigned power of attorney, and the fraudulent mortgage statement for $380,000. She picked up the mortgage document. "This is completely void under Georgia's marital property statutes. Your husband executed a loan secured by the marital homestead without your consent or authorization. That's legally unenforceable." Leora leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means I will issue an immediate formal subpoena to the lending institution within the framework of the divorce action to compel their compliance. Standard discovery procedure. No independent whistleblowing required. We serve them, they comply, or they face contempt charges. The loan disappears." I watched Leora's face. The tension that had lived there for months started to ease. "How long?" Leora asked. "I can file the divorce petition and subpoena by Friday. The bank will have 10 days to respond. Pearl's home will be legally protected within 2 weeks. Adrienne turned to me. "And you, the power of attorney, the assisted living correspondence, the systematic isolation. We can use all of it. Financial elder abuse is a criminal charge in Georgia, but more importantly, it establishes a pattern of coercive control that strengthens Leora's position. You have options," she continued, "more than you think." Leora smiled, truly smiled for the first time since entering the room. I watched my daughter-in-law begin to believe she might actually escape. Relief isn't the same as victory. It's just the moment you realize you're allowed to fight back. Wednesday evening at 9:45 p.m., I checked the iCloud family sharing folder out of weekly habit. I like to see new photos of Pearl School activities drawing her gap-toothed smile. Under her profile, there was a new file in the voice memos folder, 23 minutes and 14 seconds long, recorded 3 days ago. I frowned. Pearl was 8 years old. She barely knew how to use most iPad apps. I downloaded the file and plugged in my headphones. At 11 p.m., I sat alone in my dark kitchen and listened. Pearl had opened the Voice Memos app, probably by accident, and left her iPad on the desk in Brent's home office. He'd forgotten to lock the door. She'd gone outside to play. The device had automatically synced to the shared cloud without her understanding what it was. 23 minutes of my son speaking clearly on the phone with someone, his Florida partner based on the context. I heard Brent say it around minute 7. "The old man will sign it. He doesn't know a damn thing. Once I have that POA, we can move the capital within 48 hours. An 8-year-old girl left her iPad on a desk and captured the truth her grandfather spent 40 years learning to recognize. Sometimes the most damning evidence comes from the most innocent witnesses. I listened to the entire recording. Every word, Every dismissive comment about his wife, every calculation about how to access my assets, every plan to avoid detection. When it ended, I laid the iPad down on the table. I looked out into the dark. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered to no one, "look at our boy." And for the first time in years since Margaret's funeral, I wept. Not quiet tears, real weeping, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and broken. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd taught to respect the law, talking about me like I was an obstacle, a mark, something to manipulate and discard. I sat there in my dark kitchen until 1 a.m. staring at nothing. The recording wasn't admissible in court, obtained accidentally by a minor without consent, synced through consumer cloud services. No judge would allow it. But it told me exactly where the skeletons were buried. Every confidence, every plan, every vulnerability. Thursday morning, at 5:30 a.m., I stood in my rose garden. I'd been out there since 4 a.m., unable to sleep. Heavy morning dew soaked my shoes. I called Vernon. He answered immediately. "Walter, it's 5:30 in the morning. I need to admit something to you," I said. Silence on the line. 4 months ago, I picked up anomalies in the way Brent talked about his fund's capital structure. Small things, phrases that didn't quite make sense. An active IRS agent would have audited him right then. "But you didn't look closer," Vernon said quietly. "No, I quietly retained legal counsel. I structured an irrevocable trust to protect my assets as a defensive measure. But I kept hoping I was misreading the data. I kept hoping I was wrong about my own son." The garden was silent except for birds starting their morning songs. "Vernon, the true regret isn't that I suspected him. It's that I spent 4 months waiting for proof I was wrong. My daughter-in-law endured 4 months of hell because I hesitated, because I wanted to believe my son was better than the evidence suggested." Vernon let me finish. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For what it's worth, you're human. Any father would have done the same. Maybe. But starting today," my voice steadied with absolute resolve, "starting today, not one more day of hesitation. What do you need?" "A coordinated timeline. Legal, federal, personal protection, all synchronized. 6 weeks to dismantle everything he built. And I need to do it right. No corners cut, no revenge, just justice. I'll set up a call with the attorney for this afternoon. We'll map it out. Thank you." I hung up and stood there watching the sun rise over the Buckhead Rose Garden. The same roses Margaret and I had planted 4 years ago. The same garden where this had all started with a phone call on a Friday evening. The defensive phase was over. I'd spent 4 months hoping my son would prove me wrong. Now I knew better. Now I had evidence, allies, legal strategy, and a 6-week timeline. And now finally I stopped being a worried father and became what I'd been trained to be for 28 years. A federal agent hunting a criminal who happened to share my last name. The hesitation was done. The 3-way secure video call connected at 9 a.m. Thursday morning, me in my Buckhead home office. Vernon Dalton from his DOJ consulting space. Adrienne Blackwell from her Midtown law firm, and for the first time since this began, we weren't reacting to Brent's moves, but engineering our own. I looked at both faces on my screen and asked the critical question, 6 weeks, 42 days. Can we make it work? Adrienne didn't hesitate. "If we move precisely and don't waste a single day," Vernon pulled up a document on screen. "Let me map the operational phases." I grabbed a legal pad and started taking notes. "Weeks 1 and 2, Vernon said. "We finalized the forensic accounting trail using your file 412 analysis. Adrienne executes the bank subpoena for the fraudulent mortgage through the sealed divorce action. We file the divorce complaint under seal to preserve element of surprise. And I make secure contact with the CFO Kieran Long through DOJ channels to establish formal cooperation." "Weeks 3 and 4, Adrienne continued. "You meet with Brent. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recording. You get him talking. You capture everything on tape legally. No violations. No procedural errors that could get it thrown out." Weeks 5 and 6. Vernon finished. "The climax. Brent has a 10th anniversary gala scheduled for Garrett Capital, pre-planned already on the calendar. We serve divorce papers and SEC Wells. Notice simultaneously in front of 150 guests. Public exposure. No escape." I sat back in my chair. "The recording from Pearl, can we introduce it in court? Adrian shook her head gently. No, it's inadmissible. Accidental recording by a minor without knowledge or consent. No judge will allow it. But Vernon added, it tells us exactly where the skeletons are buried. Every conversation he had. Every plan he made. It's a perfect investigative roadmap. We know what questions to ask, which transactions to target, which co-conspirators to pressure. An 8-year-old girl's accidental recording, legally worthless in court, but strategically priceless as a map to her father's crimes. I looked at the operational timeline on my screen. 6 weeks broken into phases. Every phase with designated protocols and contingencies. What about the CFO? I asked. Can we trust him? That's what I need to find out, Vernon said. I'm meeting him this Saturday. Neutral location. Private attorney present. If he's serious about cooperation, he'll have internal transaction ledgers that Leora's files couldn't capture. And if he's not serious, then we proceed without him. But Walter... Vernon leaned forward on screen. If the CFO delivers what he says he has, this case goes from strong to airtight. Internal ledgers showing exactly how Brent shuffled money between accounts. That's the smoking gun. Adrian spoke up. One more thing. The divorce filing. I'm doing it under seal. That means Brent won't know until we're ready to serve him. No advance warning. No time to hide assets or destroy evidence. How long can we keep it sealed? I asked. Until the moment we serve him. Standard procedure in cases involving asset concealment and abuse allegations. The court understands the need for tactical surprise. I nodded. Every phase has contingencies. Every phase, Vernon confirmed. If Brent discovers the investigation early, we have fallback positions. If the SEC moves faster than expected, we have acceleration protocols. If the CFO gets cold feet, we have alternative evidence sources. The call ended at 10:30 a.m. I sat at my desk staring at my notes. 6 weeks, 42 days, from reactive defense to coordinated offense. Saturday afternoon, Vernon called me from his car. Just finished with the CFO, he said. How did it go? He's terrified. Sat in the corner booth of a diner 30 miles outside Atlanta, eyes darting toward every door. But he's serious about cooperation. Kieran Long was 34, the CFO of Garrett Capital Partners, who had filed the SEC whistleblower form 4 months earlier. According to Vernon, he'd been watching Brent's fraud unfold for over a year, documenting everything waiting for the right moment to come forward. He submitted the SEC Form TCR 4 months ago, Vernon continued, but he still holds internal transaction ledgers that public clearinghouses can't access, proprietary accounting systems, shadow books that show exactly how Brent moved money between investor accounts. What does he want? A formal non-prosecution cooperation framework. He wants immunity in exchange for delivering the unredacted digital records. His private attorney was there. Everything's documented. I thought about that. Did you record the interview? With his express consent. His attorney agreed. We have everything on tape. So he's the leverage we needed. Yes, the CFO holds the data. Leora's 847 files couldn't reach. He knows where every dollar went, every fake return, every fraudulent transaction. I looked out my office window at the afternoon sun. He wants to meet with me, doesn't he? Vernon paused. How did you know? Because he wants to look me in the eye. He wants to see if the father is complicit or a victim. He needs to know whose side I'm on. You're right. He asked specifically about meeting you. The CFO was the inside witness. The forensic files were the ammunition, and I was the trigger. But Vernon knew you don't show the defendant the trigger until you're ready to pull it. What did you tell him? I asked. Vernon's voice was firm. No, not yet. Save that card for the final play. I understood immediately. The moment Kieran Long and I sat across from each other, Brent's defense attorneys would scream conspiracy and witness tampering. They'd argue we coordinated testimony. They'd claim the investigation was a vendetta orchestrated by a vengeful father. So I stay in the shadows. For now, I'm just a concerned father gathering evidence to protect his daughter-in-law, a retired agent analyzing financial records out of personal concern. Nothing improper, nothing that could compromise the case. You're right, I said. Keep me separated from him until the gala. No direct contact. No coordination that could be questioned. Exactly. When the time comes when we serve those papers in front of 150 witnesses, you step forward as an independent party, a father protecting his family, not a co-conspirator building a federal case. Understood. Walter Vernon said quietly, "We're building something that will stand up in every court family bankruptcy federal. But only if we do it right. Only if every piece is clean and defensible. No shortcuts," I said. "No shortcuts." The call ended. I sat at my desk as the afternoon light shifted across the floor. 6 weeks. The CFO wants to meet me. The divorce is filing under seal. The forensic evidence is ready. The timeline is set. And I remain invisible until the moment everything comes together. A concerned father. Nothing more. Nothing less. Until the gala. Adrian Blackwell's text arrives at 6:47 a.m. Tuesday morning. Subpoena results in. Call me now. I'm already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee. I dial her number. She answers on the first ring. The signature on the spousal consent form doesn't match Leora's exemplars. Not even close. I close my eyes. How bad? Bad enough that it's obviously forged. Different pen pressure, different letter formation. A handwriting expert could testify to this in 30 seconds. Walter, your son, got sloppy. What does that mean for us? It means the $380,000 second mortgage is void under Georgia marital property law. Unilateral execution of a loan secured by marital property without proper spousal authorization. I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze the property title this morning. How long? Court will issue a TRO within 48 hours. Pearl's home will be legally untouchable. The bank can't foreclose. Brent can't sell it. It's frozen. I think of Pearl's room, the stuffed rabbit on her bed, the crayon drawings taped to the wall, and feel the weight lift for the first time in weeks. Can he challenge the TRO, I ask? He can try, but perjury on a mortgage instrument is a felony. If he challenges, we force depositions. He'll have to testify under oath about that signature. His attorneys won't let him risk that. So Pearl's safe. Pearl's safe, Adrian confirms. I hang up and sit at the kitchen table as the sun rises over Buckhead. One piece secured. One 8-year-old girl who will keep her home. Brent's desperation made him sloppy, and that sloppiness just saved his daughter. Wednesday evening, the core team convenes in the basement committee room of Buckhead Community, Baptist Church Neutral Ground, arranged by Reverend Clarence Whitfield, the same man who buried my wife 3 years ago. The room is small, folding table, metal chairs, fluorescent lights overhead. Adrian sits at one end with her briefcase open, Leora beside her. I sit across from them. Vernon joins via secure video call on Adrian's laptop. Adrian spreads documents across the table. Bank subpoena results. The TRO, the sealed divorce filing, File 412, the 6-week operational timeline, and a floor plan. Leora looks at me. Her eyes are red, but her voice is steady. Dad, are you standing with me? I look at her for a long moment, then I shake my head. No, I say. I am standing with what is right. She smiles, really smiles for the first time since this meeting started. Because I'm not doing this for revenge, she says. I'm doing this for Pearl. That's exactly why I'm here. Adrian lays out the final 4 weeks. Walter meets Brent, records the conversation under Georgia's one-party consent law, baits him into talking about the POA and the fund structure. Then the execution, Brent's 10th anniversary. Gala, November 8th. Grand Hyatt Ballroom. 200 guests. Divorce papers served at 8:15 right after his opening remarks. SEC Wells. Notice served simultaneously. Public, irreversible. No backroom settlement, Adrian says. No sealed proceedings. Public exposure in front of every investor he defrauded. Reverend Whitfield, sitting quietly in the corner, speaks for the first time. This is about protecting Pearl. Yes, I say. Then I'll pray for all of you. And for Brent. Because what you're about to do will destroy him. He destroyed himself, Leora says quietly. We're just making sure everyone knows it. Everyone leaves at 9. I sit alone in the church basement, staring at the floor plan Adrienne left behind. Stage here. Investor tables in a semicircle. Exit routes in red. 200 witnesses. 1 microphone. I trace the path from entrance to podium with my finger. Calculate sight lines. Think about timing. Think about my son standing on that stage believing he's won. He has no idea what's coming. I look at the floor plan one last time. Then I say one word aloud to the empty room. Good. The call came Monday morning at 9:47 a.m., earlier than Brent's usual rhythm. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad? Not his typical smooth opener. There was an edge beneath the casual tone, like a wire pulled just slightly too tight. How are you feeling? Fine, son. The usual complaints. Good. A pause. I could hear him breathing, calculating. Listen, I need to swing by this weekend. Saturday afternoon around 2. I've got some insurance paperwork that we should get signed, beneficiary updates. Nothing urgent, but you know how these things pile up. Insurance paperwork. 4 weeks after the durable power of attorney. I let the silence stretch just long enough. Of course, son. I've been looking forward to seeing you. Great, won't take long. He ended the call before I could respond. No mention of Pearl. No question about Leora. The conversation had the practiced efficiency of a man checking items off a list. I sat in my kitchen with the phone still warm in my hand, watching morning light cut across the counter. Brent had always been good at reading pressure, knowing when a negotiation was tilting, when to press advantage or retreat. He could sense the walls moving closer even if he couldn't see who was building them. The TRO on the mortgage had been filed under seal, but banks talk. The SEC's expanded inquiry would have generated ripples, phone calls that went unanswered, meetings that shifted tone. He was coming to secure another signature before whatever he sensed could materialize. I texted Vernon, he called. Saturday 2 p.m., asking for insurance paperwork signature. The response came in less than a minute. Perfect. I'll be there Friday night. The human brain processes fear through patterns. I learned that during my first month at IRSCI. When someone lies, their body betrays them in micro-expressions, tension in the jaw, speech patterns that shift off baseline. But interrogation isn't about spotting lies. It's about creating conditions where truth becomes easier than deception, where the target talks themselves into corners they didn't see coming. I had conducted formal interrogations across 43 cases over my career. I knew exactly how long to let silence stretch before it became uncomfortable. Which questions prompted defensiveness versus elaboration, how to use the subject's own words as a mirror. Brent had sat across from me at Sunday dinners for 40 years learning my patterns, but he'd never seen me work. Vernon arrived Friday at 8:30 p.m. carrying a leather briefcase. He set it on my dining table and opened it with careful precision. Inside a device smaller than a deck of cards, matte black, professional grade. Federal standard, Vernon said. Georgia's a one-party consent state. You're legally clear to record any conversation you're part of. The file uploads to encrypted cloud storage in real time, so even if he finds it and destroys it, we have the recording. He showed me the placement shirt pocket microphone positioned to catch everything within 12 feet. Then he pulled out a legal pad covered in precise handwriting. Walk me through the interrogation. We worked for 3 hours. Vernon played Brent defensive dismissive, then calculating when pressed. I practiced questions that sounded like concern but were actually traps. I've been worried about you, son. The SEC inquiry, is that going to impact your investors? Leading him to acknowledge the investigation existed, that it threatened client funds. This mortgage on my house, the one I didn't sign, do you know anything about that? Forcing him to either confess or commit to a lie we could disprove. The key was to let him talk. Brent's confidence had always been his greatest asset and his critical vulnerability. When he felt in control, he over-explained, provided details no one asked for constructed justifications that revealed more than they defended. What if he realizes what you're doing? Vernon asked at 11:40 p.m. What if he stops talking? I thought about Seymour Lockwood standing in my living room. My dad backs me 100%. I thought about Leora's 8 months of surveillance files. I thought about Pearl's recording, inadmissible in court, but devastating in its clarity. The old man will sign it. He won't stop, I said. He thinks I'm the mark. He'll keep talking because he believes he's smarter than I am. Vernon studied me across the table. And if he doesn't state enough, if he dances around direct admission, I met his eyes. 43 cases. 43 targets who thought they could talk their way past a federal agent. 43 recordings that ended with confessions their attorneys spent years trying to suppress. Vernon, I said quietly, I've interrogated 40 targets. I know how to draw the line. He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second device, identical to the first. Back up, he said, in case he asks you to empty your pockets. I stared at the 2 recorders on my dining table. Tomorrow afternoon, my son would walk through my front door, expecting to secure another signature. Instead, he would spend an hour talking to his father, and every word would be recorded. Vernon stood to leave at midnight. At my front door, he turned back, Walter, after tomorrow, there's no going back. Once he incriminates himself on tape, this stops being an investigation. It becomes evidence for prosecution. I know. Are you ready for that? I thought about the 23 families whose retirement funds were gone, about Leora monitored and controlled for 8 months, about Pearl whose home had been leveraged without her knowledge, about the difference between love and justice and what you do when you can't have both. Yes, I said, I'm ready. After Vernon left, I sat alone in my dark living room. The recorders were upstairs charging. The house was quiet, except for familiar sounds. The heating system, the settling of floors, the distant hum of the refrigerator. In 14 hours, Brent would arrive. My phone buzzed at 12:47 a.m. A text from Adrian Blackwell. 58. My attorney, SEC Wells' notice was issued today. He'll receive it Monday. Whatever you're doing tomorrow, do it now, or it won't matter. I read the message 3 times. Brent didn't know he'd been formally notified. He was coming tomorrow to secure control of my insurance beneficiaries, still believing he could manage the pressure if he moved fast enough. But the federal machinery was already in motion. By Monday morning, he would know the SEC was preparing enforcement action. By Tuesday, his attorneys would tell him to stop talking to anyone about anything. Tomorrow was the last window, the last chance to get him on record before he went silent. I typed back, "Understood. I'll handle it." Then I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness, listening to my house settle around me, counting the hours until my son arrived. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Saturday afternoon. I took one breath, pressed the record button on the micro recorder in my breast pocket, and opened the door to my son. Brent stood on my porch in pressed khakis and a navy quarter-zip leather portfolio under one arm. His handshake was firm, but his palm was damp. "Hey, Dad. Thanks for making time." "Of course, I made tea." I led him to the living room. The afternoon light came through the windows at a sharp angle. I'd positioned my chair so the recorder would catch everything clearly. Vernon had tested the acoustics last night. "How's Pearl doing in school?" I asked, pouring tea. My hands were steady. "She texted me a picture of her science project last week." Brent accepted the cup but didn't drink. "She's fine. Busy with school stuff." He set the portfolio on the coffee table. "Listen, Dad, I know you're not big on paperwork, but this is important. Insurance beneficiary updates, we need to make sure everything's structured properly." He opened the portfolio. The document inside had the unmistakable formatting of a legal instrument. Multiple pages, signature blocks, witness lines. This wasn't insurance paperwork. This was a durable power of attorney. I pulled it closer, squinting like I was struggling with small print. "Walk me through it, son. What exactly does this do?" "It protects your assets." Brent leaned forward, voice smooth. "With the divorce going on, Leora's lawyers are going to come after everything they can reach. If your assets are temporarily transferred to my control, they're shielded from any claims." I nodded slowly like I was processing complicated information. "So this POA, it protects my assets from what exactly? From Leora, from her lawyers, from anyone trying to destabilize the family." He gestured at the document. "It's temporary, just until things settle down. Then everything transfers back." I let the silence stretch, counted to 5. Then asked the question Vernon and I had rehearsed. "And the investors? The ones you manage at Garrett Capital. They won't have any claim." Brent's expression flickered just for a second. Then the smooth mask returned. "The investors are taken care of. Trust me." I was nodding like a confused old man, but inside, I was counting. Conspiracy to defraud. Wire fraud, fiduciary breach. And now on tape, his explicit statement that asset transfers would shield funds from investor claims. Acknowledgement of the fraud's existence. Confirmation of intent to conceal. Every word was being captured by the device in my breast pocket, uploading in real time to encrypted cloud storage. Even if he discovered it and destroyed the recorder, the evidence was already preserved. He kept talking, explaining how temporary transfers work, how the family needs to stay unified, how this is what's best for everyone, especially Pearl. Each sentence added another layer to the recorded confession. I'd conducted 40 interrogations over my career. I knew exactly when to stay quiet and let the target keep talking. Brent's confidence was doing the work for me. "Let me ask you something," I said, setting down my teacup. "This transfer, how long would you need control?" 6 months, maybe a year. Just until the SEC inquiry wraps up and the divorce is finalized. There it was. Explicit acknowledgement of the SEC investigation on tape. I see. I picked up the document again, flipped through the pages slowly. Then I set it down. I'd like to have my attorney review this first. No. The word came sharp and fast. Brent's entire demeanor shifted, the smooth sales pitch evaporating. Dad, we don't have time for attorneys. This needs to be signed today. I just think it's wise to... If you're not going to cooperate, you're not seeing your granddaughter anymore. His voice was flat clinical. You're not fit to be around an impressionable kid when you're fracturing this family. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The man sitting across from me had Pearl's eyes and my late wife's smile. I'd taught him to ride a bike on this street, helped him with calculus homework at this dining table, watched him graduate summa cum laude and build a successful firm. And now he was threatening to weaponize my granddaughter unless I signed over control of my assets to shield his fraud. The moment he threatened Pearl, something in my chest went cold and still. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a target subject of investigation demonstrating consciousness of guilt, engaging in elder abuse and familial coercion. The recorder captured every word. I held his gaze. For the first time in this conversation, I let him see past the confused elderly father act. Just for 3 seconds, I let him see the federal agent who'd spent 30 years taking down financial criminals. Then I blinked and the mask returned. I see, I said quietly. Let me think about it. Go home, son. Brent stared at me, trying to read what had just shifted. Then he stood, gathered his portfolio, and headed for the door. I walked him out in silence. His Mercedes pulled away down the oak-lined street at 3:18 p.m. I walked back inside, closed the door, and locked it. Pulled the recorder from my pocket. The red light was still active, 18 minutes, 23 seconds of recording time. Every word preserved. I called Vernon. He answered on the first ring. It's done, I said, every word. Explicit asset transfers to shield from investor claims. Acknowledge the SEC investigation. Threatened to cut off Pearl access when I asked for attorney review. I sat down suddenly, exhausted. Conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. All on tape. Vernon was quiet for a moment. Georgia, one-party consent. It's all admissible. This is it. Yes. I'll call Adrian. We'll get this to the SEC by Monday morning. He paused. How are you? I looked at the teacup still sitting on the coffee table. The portfolio Brent had forgotten in his rush to leave. I'm fine. Send me the extraction protocol. I want 3 copies. 1 for Adrian, 1 for the SEC, 1 for our records. Already setting it up. I ended the call and sat alone in my living room, holding a device smaller than a deck of cards that contained my son's confession. 2 weeks until the gala. 14 days until everything came to light in front of 200 witnesses. Brent thought he'd just pressured his elderly father into compliance. What he'd actually done was seal his own legal fate. The phone shattered the 2 a.m. silence, and before I even looked at the screen, I knew it was Brent. No one else calls at this hour, unless the world is ending. I answered on the 4th ring. Yes. Dad? His voice was stripped of all arrogance, all smooth confidence. Raw, desperate. Dad, I need the money right now. I'm in catastrophic trouble. Lyle's gone. He liquidated everything and ran. I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp. Sunday morning, 2:03 a.m. 12 hours since I'd recorded his confession in my living room. What do you mean gone? I mean gone. Fled. $200,000 from the operating account office cleared out. Phone disconnected. His words came fast, panicked. Dad, I need cash. Now. Whatever you can wire, 50,000, 100,000. I have to cover client redemptions Monday morning, or everything collapses. I listened to my son beg for money to continue defrauding his victims. The recording device from yesterday sat on my nightstand, 18 minutes of confession that would destroy him. Dad, are you there? Did you hear me? I need... Go to sleep, son, I said quietly. We talk in the morning. I hung up at 2:17 a.m. and didn't lose a minute of sleep. Vernon called at sunrise. DOJ got him. Miami International. CBP detention, Florida probation violation. I was already dressed, making coffee in my kitchen. The November morning was cold and clear through my window. Lyle. Federal lookout notice was placed Friday standard procedure, when SEC escalates to Wells notice. He tried to board a flight to Grand Cayman at midnight. Customs flagged him immediately. Vernon's voice was crisp professional. His 2019 securities fraud conviction came with 3 years probation. Leaving Florida jurisdiction violated the terms. He's not going anywhere. I poured my coffee, watched steam rise in the morning light. Brent's partner had abandoned him completely, taking what he could carry, and running for a jurisdiction without extradition treaties. But the federal machinery had been waiting. "What about Brent?" Vernon asked. "He called it too, begging for money to cover Monday redemptions." "What did you tell him?" "To go to sleep." Vernon was quiet for a moment. "Then the gala's tomorrow night. Final team meeting tonight, church basement, 7 o'clock. Everyone needs to be there." "I'll be there." I spent Sunday morning in my garden pruning rose bushes that wouldn't bloom again until spring. The physical work kept my hands busy, while my mind counted down the hours. Tomorrow night, everything would come to light. Pearl texted me at noon a photo of her science project, the one about photosynthesis. I texted back a heart emoji and told her I loved her. I didn't tell her that tomorrow night her father's world would end. The church basement was exactly as it had been every Sunday for the past 4 weeks. Fluorescent lights, humming, folding chairs, arranged in a circle coffee maker, gurgling in the corner. But tonight felt different, final. Leora arrived first, looking exhausted but determined. Adrian came next with her leather briefcase. Vernon arrived precisely at 7, carrying a file box. Reverend Clarence Whitfield stood at the door, greeting each of us like we were arriving for prayer meeting instead of planning the systematic exposure of financial fraud. Kieran Long, 34. The CFO who'd filed the SEC whistleblower complaint 4 months ago came last. He looked like he'd lost weight since I'd seen his photo in Vernon's files, thin pale, but his handshake was firm. "Thank you for coming," I said to him. "What you did filing that TCR, it started everything." Kieran nodded. I couldn't keep watching him destroy people. We sat. Adrian opened her briefcase and pulled out a document, bound with a blue backing. The divorce complaint and asset inventory. 47 pages documenting systematic financial abuse, fraudulent transfers, and marital misconduct. I'll personally serve it tomorrow night at 8:15, immediately following Brent's opening remarks. Process is clean. She slid it across the table to Leora, who stared at it for a long moment before touching the cover. Vernon pulled documents from his file box. SEC received the forensic packet from Kieran, plus Walter's analysis on Friday. They're executing a Wells Notice formal notification of enforcement action. An SEC attorney will attend the gala to serve it in person at 8:20. Civil enforcement, no handcuffs, just legal devastation. "And the recording?" Adrian asked, looking at me. I touched my jacket pocket where I'd been carrying a USB drive for 2 days. 18 minutes. Explicit admission of asset transfers to shield from investor claims. Acknowledgement of the SEC investigation, and a direct threat to cut off my granddaughter access when I asked for attorney review. Conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse under Georgia law. The room was quiet. Vernon said, "You'll deliver the final hard drives tomorrow night at the venue." "Yes." Internal ledgers showing the complete Ponzi structure, every fabricated return, every falsified statement, every shell company transfer. Kieran's voice was steady. Everything they'll need for criminal referral. Reverend Whitfield bowed his head for a moment of silence. In the basement quiet, I could almost hear tomorrow's collapse, the sound of a house of cards finally falling. When he looked up, he said, "This is justice, not revenge. Remember that tomorrow night." Adrian pulled out a single sheet of paper and handed it to me. Timeline: 7:30 arrival, 8 o'clock opening remarks, 8:15 service of divorce complaint, 8:20 Wells notice, 8:25 Kieran's testimony, everything coordinated to the minute. I looked at the schedule. Each line was a countdown to my son's destruction. 200 people will be there, Vernon said. Investors, media, business leaders. This won't be quiet. Good, Leora said. Her voice was soft, but absolutely certain. They deserve to know, all of them. I folded the timeline once and put it in my pocket. Tomorrow night, I said, looking around the circle at these people who'd spent 6 weeks building an airtight case. My son believes it's the night he wins. He's throwing a party funded by 23 families' life work. He has no idea what's coming. We left the church at 9:30 p.m. The November night was cold and clear stars visible above the parking lot. Tomorrow was Monday, the 10th anniversary gala for Garrett Capital Management, the night everything ended. The golden chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt's 22nd floor ballroom cast everything in warm light champagne jazz Atlanta's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, and my son stood in the center of it all, like a king who believed his kingdom was eternal. Garrett Capital Management's 10th anniversary gala. 150 guests in evening attire filled the marble-floored space, their conversations rising and falling beneath the jazz quartet's smooth rhythms. White-jacketed servers circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with fresh flowers, orchids, and white roses in crystal vases on every table. Brent moved through the crowd like he owned not just the room, but the city visible beyond the windows. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, pocket square, precisely folded. He shook hands, embraced investors, laughed at jokes I couldn't hear from my position near the entrance. Every gesture projected absolute confidence. I arrived at 7:45 p.m. wearing the charcoal suit I'd worn to federal depositions for 3 decades. Leora had texted me the timing arrived late enough that Brent can't create a scene early enough to be visible for the opening remarks. Brent saw me the moment I entered. For 3 seconds his smile faltered, genuine surprise crossing his face. Then he recovered the mask, sliding back into place, and he crossed the ballroom toward me. "Dad," he embraced me, the gesture performed for the watching crowd. "I didn't think you'd make it." "Wouldn't miss it, son." His cologne was expensive and overpowering. His hand on my shoulder felt like a claim of ownership look. "Everyone, even my father, supports me." A photographer appeared. "Mr. Garrett, can we get a photo?" Father and son, 10 years of success. We posed, Brent's arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. The camera flashed 3 times. I thought about the USB drive in my jacket pocket containing his recorded confession, and I kept smiling. "Great, thank you." The photographer moved away. Brent leaned close, voice dropping. "About Saturday, the insurance paperwork. We need to finish that conversation. Later, son, tonight's your celebration." He studied my face, trying to read something. Then someone called his name, and he turned away, pulled back into the crowd of investors who didn't know their money was gone. I scanned the room, methodically cataloging faces. Seymour Lockwood, at table 6, wearing a tuxedo that looked rented, holding a champagne flute, the man who'd invested $400,000, believing my son was backed by me. 3 tables back, a couple in their 70s, holding hands, her jewelry modest, his suit well worn but carefully pressed. Another family on the victim list Vernon had compiled. At table 8, Marcus Treadwell, Brent's best friend since college, who'd lost his entire retirement savings 2 weeks ago and still didn't know the fund was a fraud. 150 people celebrating the man who'd stolen from them. I found Leora near the bar, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back severely. She looked beautiful and brittle, like glass about to shatter. Our eyes met across the room. She gave me the smallest nod. We were ready. At exactly 8 p.m., Brent stepped to the microphone at the front of the ballroom. The jazz quartet finished their song, and conversations quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight." His voice filled the room through the sound system, smooth and confident. 10 years ago, I started Garrett Capital Management with a simple vision to help families build lasting wealth through disciplined investment strategy. Looking around this room at the clients who've trusted me, some of you from day one, I'm humbled and grateful. Applause rippled through the crowd. I stood against the back wall, hands in my pockets, and watched. "This journey hasn't been without challenges," Brent continued, "but we've weathered every storm together. And I want to say something important tonight, because there's been some gossip." He paused, letting tension build. A few nervous laughs scattered through the audience. "My wife, Leora," he gestured toward her. "The woman who stood beside me for 10 years, who's been my partner in building this firm. There are people who like to see us divided. People who spread rumors about our marriage. I want to be crystal clear. She isn't going anywhere." He raised his champagne flute. "To Leora, to loyalty, to the next 10 years. The room erupted in applause and raised glasses. Leora smiled, the expression practiced and empty. I looked toward the entrance. A man in a charcoal suit stood near the doorway holding a briefcase, observing everything with the calm detachment of someone who'd spent years documenting evidence. Gerald Hayes, 48, SEC enforcement attorney. here to serve the Wells notice that would trigger federal civil enforcement action. At 8:12 p.m., the main entrance doors opened again. Adrian Blackwell stepped into the ballroom wearing a midnight blue suit, carrying a black leather folder under one arm. She moved to the side wall and stood perfectly still, waiting. The jazz quartet started a new song, something upbeat, celebratory. Brent descended from the small stage, accepting congratulations, basking in applause. I checked my watch. 8:13 p.m., 2 minutes. The final jazz note hung in the air, then died, and in the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat. The ballroom settled into expectant quiet. Guests anticipated another speech, another toast. The servers paused their circulation. Even the bartender stopped pouring. Adrian stepped forward from her position against the wall. Her heels clicked on the marble floor with the precise rhythm of a countdown. 1 step, 2, 3. 150 faces turned toward her. Brent was near table 4, champagne flute, in hand, mid-conversation with an investor. He looked up, following the collective gaze, saw Adrian walking toward him with purposeful calm. His smile froze. She crossed the ballroom in absolute silence. No one spoke. The only sound was her footsteps on marble and the faint hum of the air conditioning system. I pressed my back against the wall and watched my son's world begin to end. Leora rose from the table beside Brent, and in the ballroom silence, I watched my daughter-in-law walk across the marble floor, away from her husband toward her attorney, toward the truth, and 150 faces tracked her every step. She didn't look back. Her heels clicked steadily across the space, each step a declaration. When she reached Adrian, she turned to face the room, face Brent standing beside the woman who held the documents that would end her marriage. Adrian opened the black leather folder. Brent Garrett, she said, her voice clear and professional, carrying through the ballroom sound system because someone had left the microphone active. You are hereby served with summons for dissolution of marriage, complete asset disclosure, and complaint for elder financial abuse under Georgia Code. She extended the documents. Brent didn't move. His face had drained of all color. Adrian set the papers on the nearest table. Service is complete. You have 30 days to respond. The ballroom remained absolutely silent. No one moved. I could hear someone's phone buzzing, a ringtone ignored in the stunned quiet. Then Gerald Hayes, the SEC enforcement attorney, stepped forward from his position near the bar. He was 48, trim build, carrying a briefcase instead of champagne. He crossed to Brent with the same professional calm Adrienne had demonstrated. Mr. Garrett, this is formal notice of SEC enforcement proceedings for violations of securities law. He handed Brent a thick envelope. The Wells notice details preliminary findings of civil securities fraud. You have the right to legal representation. The commission will contact your attorney regarding next steps. Gerald stepped back. Brent stood frozen, holding the envelope like it might explode. A chair scraped against marble. Seymour Lockwood rose from table 6, 72 years old, wearing a rented tuxedo, his hands shaking. He'd been a CPA for 30 years before retirement. His voice when he spoke carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades reading the truth in numbers. I placed $400,000 into this firm because I trusted the father of Brent Garrett. He looked directly at Brent. I want everyone to know I am far from the only one. The number hung in the air like an accusation. $400,000. I watched 3 other heads nod in recognition, a woman at table 8, a couple at table 3. They knew that number. They'd lost it too. When Seymour said $400,000, the number hung in the air like an accusation, and I watched 3 other heads nod in recognition. They knew that number too, knew what it felt like to watch their life savings disappear into a fraud that wore their trust like camouflage. More people were standing now. A man near the windows. 2 women at the far table. The ballroom was fragmenting, some guests rising to leave, others pulling out phones, a few moving closer to Brent, like they wanted answers immediately. No police sirens, no handcuffs, just unvarnished truth delivered in a room full of witnesses. Brent's gaze swept the crowd, landing on faces he'd smiled at 10 minutes ago, investors he'd reassured with lies. Then his eyes found me against the back wall. He crossed the ballroom floor toward me. The crowd parted. When he reached me, his voice was ragged, stripped of all polish. You betrayed your own son. 150 people held their breath. I looked at the man I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, The college graduate who'd made me proud, the CEO who'd built a fortune by destroying families. I stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear my next words, but I didn't whisper. I wanted everyone to hear. No, I said. My voice was steady, calm. I didn't betray you. I protected my granddaughter. I paused, let the words settle. And I protected the memory of your mother, who would have been utterly ashamed of what she saw in you tonight. Brent's face crumpled. For just a second I saw the boy he'd been vulnerable, afraid human. Then the mask tried to rebuild itself, but there was nothing left to hold it together. I turned my back on my son and walked away without looking back. The ballroom erupted. Voices rising, chairs scraping, someone shouting questions. The chaos of a world collapsing in real time. I pushed through the side door onto the terrace. The November night was cold and clear. 22 floors above Atlanta, the city spread out in every direction, a grid of lights stretching toward the horizon. Traffic moved on the streets below. Office buildings glowed. Somewhere down there, people were living ordinary Monday evenings, completely unaware that up here in this ballroom, justice had finally arrived. I gripped the terrace railing metal cold against my palms. Behind me through the glass, I could see the ballroom chaos. Guests swarming, phones out. Brent surrounded by people demanding answers he couldn't give. Leora standing with Adrienne, her posture straight and certain. Vernon had appeared from somewhere speaking with Gerald Hayes. Kieran Long was handing someone a hard drive, the final evidence delivered, as promised. The machinery of justice was in motion now. Divorce proceedings, SEC investigation, criminal referrals, 23 families preparing civil suits, asset freezes, media coverage that would start tonight and continue for months. It was done. The terrace air was cold against my face, and somewhere 22 floors below Atlanta kept moving, oblivious, indifferent, alive. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, deliberately, for the first time in 6 weeks. The pressure that had been building since Leora's text, since the POA document, since the moment I'd realized my son was a criminal, it released. Not relief, exactly. Something closer to profound exhaustion. I'd spent 6 weeks building a case against my own child, recording his confession, coordinating with attorneys and federal investigators, planning his public destruction down to the minute, and now it was finished. I opened my eyes. The Atlanta skyline stretched endlessly in every direction. The city my son had tried to conquer. The investors he'd defrauded, the families whose retirement he'd stolen, they would get their justice. Not all their money back, probably, but justice. Pearl would grow up knowing her grandfather had chosen what was right over what was easy. And somewhere I hoped my wife, gone 3 years now, could rest, knowing I'd protected what mattered. I stood alone on the terrace, hands gripping the railing, looking down at Atlanta's grid of lights. Behind me, through the glass, the ballroom swarmed with chaos questions, accusations, the beginning of consequences. I took another breath, let it out slowly. It was done. By 8:45 p.m., the ballroom had lost half its guests, and my son stood in the center of the emptying space, trying to explain himself to people who were no longer listening. I watched from near the bar as Brent attempted defense. His voice carried across the thinning crowd, rising with each failed attempt to regain control. This is a liquidity challenge, not fraud. My wife orchestrated this to destroy me. He gestured toward where Leora had been standing, but she'd moved to the far side of the ballroom with Adrienne. Everything she showed you tonight is taken out of context. The SEC doesn't understand investment strategy. A man near table 8 turned his back and walked toward the exit. A woman followed, then another couple. The room was hemorrhaging guests, and Brent's voice grew more desperate. I've delivered consistent returns for 10 years. 10 years? You've all seen your statements? Fabricated statements, someone muttered. I couldn't see who. Brent's face flushed red. I'm offering every client full transparency tomorrow morning. We'll have an independent audit. But the room no longer belonged to him. The ballroom that had celebrated him 90 minutes ago now treated him like furniture, something to navigate around on the way to the exits. Near the windows, Seymour Lockwood stood in a tight circle with 5 other investors, 3 couples all over 65, all on Vernon's victim list. Gerald Hayes, the SEC attorney, stood with them taking notes while they spoke in low, urgent voices. How many of us are there? Seymour asked. 23 households confirmed, Gerald said. Likely more once the investigation expands. How do we coordinate for restitution? The commission will appoint a receiver. You'll be contacted within 10 days. They weren't looking at Brent. No one was looking at Brent anymore, not as a CEO, not as someone whose explanations mattered. Just a 40-year-old man standing alone with his actions. At 9:15 p.m., Leora walked toward the exit with Adrian. She passed within 15 feet of Brent. He watched her go. She didn't glance back. He made no move to stop her. The ballroom was nearly empty now. White-jacketed servers were clearing tables. The jazz quartet had packed up their instruments an hour ago. Camera flashes still lit up the street outside media crews, waiting for statements for footage for the story that would dominate Atlanta business news for weeks. Gerald Hayes approached Brent with additional documents: emergency asset freeze orders, deposition schedules, formal notification that all business accounts were now under federal oversight. Brent took the papers without reading them. By 10 o'clock at night, he sank into a chair at an abandoned table, surrounded by empty champagne flutes and discarded napkins. He looked like a lost child. I left the ballroom at 9 p.m. exactly, and I didn't look back, not once. The machinery of justice moves with systematic precision once it's set in motion. Vernon called Tuesday morning. SEC is formalizing civil enforcement. Timeline is 4 weeks from Wells' notice to filed complaint. We're ahead of schedule. And DOJ, reviewing for criminal indictment. Wire fraud, securities fraud. They're building the case methodically. I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee, watching November light filter through my window. How long? 6 months minimum, maybe longer. Federal cases move slowly. By the end of October, Brent had surrendered his passport as a condition of supervised release. No charges filed yet, but the investigation made him a flight risk. He was confined to Georgia, pending DOJ decision. Adrian called on November 2nd. The fraudulent mortgage is canceled. Court order was executed this morning. Pearl's home is legally secured title, restored to Leora, with no encumbrances. And the divorce? Mandatory 31-day waiting period cleared November 17th. Decree will be final December 18th, before Christmas. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Pearl's home was safe. Leora was free. The families Brent had defrauded would get their day in court, civil restitution tracked through an SEC-appointed receiver, criminal prosecution pending. The system was grinding forward, slow, methodical, inevitable. And I was just a witness now. The case I'd built, the recording, the forensic analysis, the coordination with Vernon and Adrienne and Kieran, it belonged to the federal machinery now. They didn't need me anymore. Kieran Long's internal ledgers had given them everything. The shell companies, the fabricated returns, the systematic transfer of new investor funds to pay old investor redemptions. Textbook Ponzi structure documented in meticulous detail by the CFO, who'd watched it happen and finally said enough. Vernon called again on November 10th. SEC filed civil enforcement this morning, lifetime asset monitoring, restitution orders for all 23 families, permanent bar from securities industry. What's the timeline for criminal? DOJ won't commit, but they're moving forward. Grand jury convenes in January. I hung up and realized something I hadn't thought about Brent in 3 days. It was mid-November when Vernon called with the SEC filing confirmation, and I realized I hadn't thought about Brent in 3 days. Hadn't wondered where he was living, what he was doing, whether he was sleeping. The machinery moved without me now. I was just a witness. Mid-November. I sat at my kitchen table with the SEC civil enforcement filing printed in front of me, 47 pages of findings, evidence, and proposed remedies. Lifetime asset monitoring. Restitution orders payable to 23 victim families through an appointed receiver. Permanent prohibition from acting as investment advisor. Supervised probation pending DOJ criminal trial. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd taught to value integrity, faced financial ruin and potential federal prison. I didn't know what I felt about that. Grief, maybe, for the son who could have been, for the family we'd never get back. Relief, certainly. That Pearl was safe, that Leora was free, that 23 families would see some measure of justice. Anger not anymore, just exhaustion. I closed the document and set it aside. My phone buzzed, a text from Leora Pearls asking about her dad. Can we talk this week? I stared at the message. Eventually, I'd have to face my granddaughter and explain why her father wasn't coming home, why her family had fractured, why her grandfather had chosen to destroy her father's life to protect hers. But not tonight. Tonight I would sit in my quiet house and read the paper and eat a simple dinner and go to bed at a reasonable hour. And for the first time since August, since Leora's panicked text, since the POA document, since the moment I'd realized the scope of Brent's fraud, when I closed my eyes at night, I could sleep. Pearl's laughter echoed through the empty rooms of Leora's new Midtown apartment as I carried the last box through the door, and for the first time in 6 months, the sound didn't feel fragile. "Grandpa, come see my room." She grabbed my hand and pulled me down the hallway. Sunlight streamed through bare windows. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Leora stood by the front door watching us, a small smile touching her face. She looked lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying invisible weight, and finally set it down. I found Pearl spinning in circles in her new room, arms out claiming the space. "It's bigger than my old room, and I can paint it any color I want." "What color are you thinking?" "Purple, or maybe blue." She spun again. "And you'll come visit all the time, right?" "Every week," I promised. When I returned to the living room, Leora was still standing by the door, holding her new keys. She inserted one into the deadbolt, locked it, unlocked it, locked it again, unlocked it. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. She looked up, tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to feel it, Dad." Locking a door and knowing I am the only person on earth who holds the key. I understood then. For 8 months, every door she'd locked, Brent had a key. Every space she'd claimed he'd monitored. Every boundary she'd tried to set, he'd violated. This door was hers. She locked it one more time, testing the deadbolt's resistance. Solid. Secure. Then she put the keys in her pocket and wiped her eyes. Pearl ran out. "Grandpa, will you stay tonight?" I looked at Leora. She nodded. "Yes," I said, "I am." The deposition table was sterile gray, flanked by attorneys on both sides. Late November, a conference room downtown. Brent sat across from me, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 6 weeks. We were there for procedural formalities, asset disclosure, timeline confirmation for the divorce decree. The attorneys did most of the talking trading documents in legal language. Then Brent said something his lawyers couldn't intercept. "Can you ever forgive me, Dad?" The room went silent. His attorney touched his arm. "Don't say anything more," but Brent kept his eyes on me, waiting. The silence lasted maybe 20 seconds, but it felt like 20 years. All the birthday parties and graduations and Sunday dinners that led us to this sterile room. I thought about forgiveness, about what it meant, about whether I even had the right to withhold it, when the person he'd hurt most was Pearl, and she still asked about her daddy every night. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I won't carry hatred for you. Hatred takes energy, and I promised every ounce of my remaining energy to your daughter." Brent bowed his head, stared at his hands on the table, hands that had signed fraudulent documents, transferred stolen funds, threatened his own father. Hands that used to be small enough to fit entirely in mine. "Okay," he whispered. The attorneys resumed their discussions. Documents were signed. Timeline confirmed. Divorce decree would be final December 18th. I left the conference room at 3:47 p.m., knowing it was the last time I would see my son's face for a very long time. I drove home and didn't cry until I pulled into my driveway. Days before Christmas, Adrienne called me to her office. Leora was already there when I arrived, looking confused. "What's this about?" Leora asked. Adrienne opened a file on her desk. Walter executed an irrevocable trust 4 months ago. May the same month the anomalies first appeared. His entire estate, $2.3 million, is locked in trust for Pearl's benefit until she reaches age 25. Leora looked at me, then back at Adrienne. "I don't understand." "It means Brent cannot access a single penny," Adrienne continued. "Federal bankruptcy receivers cannot touch it. The trust is sovereign, and you, Leora, are named sole trustee." Leora's hand went to her mouth. "Your father set this up before any of the investigation began," Adrienne said. "Before the recordings, before the gala, before he even knew there would be a plan. He protected Pearl's inheritance the moment he suspected something was wrong." Leora turned to me, tears streaming. "How long did you know, Dad?" I thought about the precise moment I'd stopped trusting my son. From the moment he stopped asking me a single detail about his mother's life over 3 years of marriage. I said quietly, "A man who understands love doesn't erase the people he should remember." Brent had never asked me to tell him stories about his mother after she died. Never wanted to know her favorite flowers or the songs she hummed while cooking. He'd moved forward like she was a closed chapter, convenient to forget. That's when I'd known something fundamental was broken in him. Leora's hand trembled holding the trust documents, and I realized she'd been prepared to lose everything, and I just told her she never will. The trust generates approximately $70,000 annually for Pearl's expenses. Education, healthcare, living costs, Adrian explained. At age 25, she receives the principal. Leora was crying openly now. Dad, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I reached across and took her hand. Pearl is the only thing that matters now. Everything else is just wreckage. Leora signed the documents, accepting trusteeship, acknowledging fiduciary responsibility. When we finished, she left to pick up Pearl from school. Adrian walked me to the door, looking at me with something like awe. You set that trust up 4 months ago before any of this started. How did you know? I thought about Brent at his mother's funeral 3 years ago, checking his phone during the eulogy. About the way he'd talked about investors like they were marks. About the moment I'd realized my son had become someone I didn't recognize. My son spent years assuming I was just an old man waiting out his time, I said. Turns out I was waiting for him to show his hand. I walked out into the December afternoon. Christmas lights were already up on the buildings. Atlanta was moving toward the holidays, families, gathering traditions, continuing life, persisting. And somewhere across town, Pearl was getting out of school, excited to tell her mom about her day secure in a future her grandfather had protected, before she even knew it needed protection. The December morning air smelled like cold earth and winter birds, and for the first time in 6 months, my mind held nothing but that no calculations, no evidence chains, just the garden and the quiet. I knelt in my rose garden, pruning shears in hand, examining dormant stems barely visible above frozen soil. The roses wouldn't bloom until April, but the roots were alive beneath the frost. Grandpa, Pearl ran across the yard wearing a purple jacket and mismatched mittens, her breath visible in the cold air. What are the names of these roots? I smiled. Hybrid tea roses. This one's called Peace Yellow with pink edges. That one's Mr. Lincoln, deep red. She knelt beside me. Can I help? I handed her the small watering can. Water the base, not the cold leaves. The roots drink, while the leaves stay safe from winter blight. She poured carefully, tongue between her teeth in concentration. The water disappeared into the frozen soil slowly. They look dead, she said. I touched one of the prune stems, brown and brittle. They're sleeping, saving their energy for spring. Pearl looked at the bare stems, the frozen ground, the garden showing no color, except brown and gray. Then she looked up at me with serious 8-year-old eyes. Will the flowers come back in spring? I looked at the frozen ground and the dormant stems, at the garden that had survived 30 winters since my wife planted the first rose. Yes, I said, they always do. She smiled and ran back inside. I stayed in the garden finishing the pruning clearing, dead leaves preparing the beds for winter. The work was meditative, requiring no thought beyond the next cut. When I came inside, Leora was making coffee. She'd started keeping a spare key letting herself in on Saturday mornings to share breakfast before Pearl's dance class. Late December, approaching Christmas. Leora and I sat on my back porch with morning coffee, the exact spot where everything had begun 6 months ago. The same wooden chairs, the same view of the garden, but the weight that had pressed on my chest that August evening was gone. Leora wrapped her hands around her mug. Do you have any regrets, Dad? I thought about the recording, the gala exposure, walking away from my son while he stood alone with his actions. I only regret I didn't see it clearly enough to act sooner, I said, but no regrets about what was done. Leora nodded slowly. Neither do I. We sat in quiet that required no further explanation. The choices we'd made, the investigation, the exposure, the public devastation, they were choices we could live with. Leora takes the phone call from Brent, and I realize she is protecting me now. The way I protected her, the circle closes, and I am grateful to let someone else carry the weight. Grandpa, Pearl's voice called from inside. The phone is ringing. It's Dad calling from the facility. Leora and I exchanged a long look. Brent had been calling once a week from the supervised residence where he was living pending trial. Pearl always took the calls talking about school and dance class. She didn't understand the full scope of what her father had done. Maybe someday she would, but not today. Leora stood. Go on inside, Dad. I'll take this one. She went into the house, and I heard her voice through the window. Calm, civil, setting boundaries. Brent, she's doing homework right now. You can call back tomorrow at 3. I remained on the porch alone. The winter garden stretched before me, bare stems, frozen ground, dormant life, waiting for spring. My wife had planted these roses 30 years ago. She'd tended them every season until cancer took her 6 years back. I'd kept them alive since then, fighting the blight that tried to claim them every winter. She would have known what to do about Brent. She always saw people more clearly than I did. But she wasn't here, and I'd done what I had to do. I thought about my son, not the 40-year-old executive who'd built a Ponzi scheme. The 8-year-old boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder watching television. The college graduate who'd hugged me so tight at commencement I thought my ribs would crack. Somewhere between that boy and the man in the ballroom, something had broken. And I hadn't seen it clearly enough until it was too late. 3 generations. 1 took a dark road. 2 still had their future. I stood and stepped through the doorway into the warmth of my home. My wife's photograph hung in the hallway, the same frame, the same spot it had occupied for 6 years. She was smiling, wearing the blue dress she'd loved, standing in the rose garden during peak bloom. I stopped and looked at her face. For the first time since August, I could meet her eyes without shame. I did what I could, I whispered. I protected Pearl. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I knew what she would say. You did what was right. That's all anyone can do. I walked forward into the kitchen where Pearl was setting the table for breakfast. Leora was making scrambled eggs. The phone call was over. They were laughing about something, and Pearl was demonstrating a dance move. Grandpa, watch. She spun in a circle, arms extended. Beautiful, I said. I sat at my kitchen table and accepted the coffee Leora poured. We ate breakfast together, 3 people building a new normal from the wreckage of the old. People ask what I learned in 28 years of financial investigation. I give them technical answers about tracing assets, about following paper trails, about patterns that reveal fraud. But the real lesson, the one I learned at 69 years old, is this. The most dangerous person is never the stranger you don't know. It is the person you've known so long you stop truly looking. I looked at Pearl across the table, her face bright with laughter. I would never stop looking. The investigation was over. My son was gone. But my granddaughter was safe, and her future was protected, and the roses would bloom again in spring. Justice and peace are not the same thing. But sometimes, if you're lucky and you make the hardest choices when they matter most, you can find a way to live with both. And you listening to my story, remember this. The hardest choices a dad can make are often the ones that save the people who matter most. Don't make my mistake. I spent 40 years believing that knowing someone was the same as seeing them clearly. I watched my son succeed, but I stopped truly looking at who he was becoming. By the time I saw the truth, 23 families had lost their savings. Love should never make you blind to harm. The lesson I learned is this. Trust must be earned continually. The most dangerous person isn't a stranger. It's the family member you've known so long you stop questioning their choices. When a dad loves someone, you want to believe the best. But protecting the innocent matters more even when it costs everything. I believe God put me through this to teach me that justice and peace aren't the same, but you can find a way to live with both. This wasn't revenge. It was a dad protecting his family. What would you have done? Would you expose your own family member, or protect them despite the harm? Drop a comment. I read everyone. If this story moved you, please share it, and subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge for more stories about family justice and courage. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time matters. Before you go, this story contains fictionalized details to strengthen the message. What matters most is the lesson about family loyalty, justice, and doing what's right.